This is my video for contemporary context, traditional materials and new and future materials. I decided to do a video because I wanted to reflect on what I've learnt over the past few weeks, months and so forth with the contemporary practice. Now, it was interesting because there was lots of research, there was lots of sampling and lots of critical analysis and reflection. Now, previous to this, I'd had experience with contemporary contexts, so the ideas of a design process, research, inspiration, and so forth. I'd already started to put this into practice with contemporary practice. So it kind of became a little bit easier with the format of research, sketchbook work, and also in between I'd had to deal with trying to prepare for assessment, and this is where I'd learned how to do video footage, upload onto YouTube, and I've become semi-confident with it, so I thought I'd continue with that. Due to the current circumstances with COVID, etc., we've not been able to post any of our assignment work, so what I'm trying to say is really enjoying making the videos. They are basic, they are simple, but at least they're a demonstration of my assignment work. Now, we did cover traditional textiles, which was really interesting. One thing that I did really learn with the assignment and the brief was I never really consider my work to be emotional. It's always experimental, it's always playful. But this time, with traditional textiles, again, after doing all the research on artists and then the actual material, discovering that it became a little bit more emotional in the concept of that we were asked to define what traditional was. For me, tradition is all about family and family values. So I'd produced a collection of samples which were photographs of grandparents and my mother and aunties as a child, and I'd made a capsule collection which will be demonstrated and can be demonstrated on my blog and my video footage in my sketchbooks. But what I wanted to focus on with this video was we then, on the second stage of contemporary practice, we started to look and work with new and future materials. Now, it was something that I hadn't considered before, even though I'd worked with a variety of materials, things that we as practitioners collect along the way, so there's always something in a box, or there's always something in storage or up in the loft, that we have a tendency to be a little bit like a magpie and collect things and so forth. But what was quite interesting was it did lead a pathway with research and investigation and more playful and exciting sampling, that I think it had made me realise that what I'd learnt in contemporary context and what I'd learnt in traditional materials was how well and how far my studies have come for the development of my own personal work and my thought processes. Now, I think there are strengths and weaknesses in my work. Practical with the sampling, there will always be the thing for playfulness, exciting, experimenting, pushing the boundaries. My big issues are I'm not very comfortable with the academic side of things, writing about critical analysis. Reflective work isn't too bad. The positive outcomes, the negative outcomes in my work and my practice. But I do feel, and I do consider it, that it's a possible weakness within this process that I'm going through, and I feel at times there is a brick wall or an obstacle which I do try to overcome. Some of the technical side with the computer side of things I do get a little bit caught up in, because I suppose what I'm trying to, or make the point of, is my work, I like it to be quite craft based. Don't have a tendency to want to visually or get stimulated by seeing work in a computer, if we as was to say. But anyway, what I want to do with this video is to just demonstrate a little bit of the process, and hopefully see that there is a refinement in my work, which was quite a big obstacle in contemporary context, but eventually we got there. So hopefully I've again produced too much work as always, but I've put together a collection, small collection of my favourite samples, just to talk through, just to analyse a little bit, just to conclude new and future materials, and I think I really enjoyed it. So I hope you do when you see some of the samples, and I just want to briefly talk you through them. Through the experimentation, I produced this one large sample. Now this was quite interesting because this was a foil blanket that I purchased. Now I did initially at the start to use this for some basic samples to start the sampling process, but I've actually used it for display purposes with various processes and experiments of my new and future materials. But the one thing that I actually quite like about this is it makes the samples very tactile, and also it generates noise, which I really like, because I kind of feel that gives the samples and the work a little bit more essence to the fact that I like to be able to touch, feel, and also as well enjoy the colour palette that I hadn't really considered. Moving on from the very early stages of sampling, I then came across mixing some of my materials, and if we can just get to them. Making the same application again with the foil blanket to demonstrate and display the samples. This was on a larger scale. It could actually be a fabric. But the one good thing that I discovered with the foil blanket is it actually moves and makes the smaller samples that I constructed with the mixture of expandable foam, which was a new discovery, and mesh, actually makes the fabric quite flexible and again very tactile. So that then will become something at a later date to put the samples into a context. One of the ideas that this did remind me of was that it did start to look very architectural textiles, which when I started to research some of my fashion designers that work alongside scientists, their work is also quite three-dimensional, quite sensory, and I think that is one of the things that I quite like about this foil blanket. It has a sensory feel to it, and even, you know, closing your eyes, you can still hear it and you can still feel the texture and the tactile of the pieces that I've applied to the foil blanket. Moving on, continuing with my research, I'd started to notice that my work looked very molecule-like, very structural and almost layered. But during the research, I'd come across a very interesting article about antibacterial textiles, and obviously with the current climate at the moment with COVID, seemed very applicable. So, making suggestions with the experiments, I'd started to use a face mask as a mount for putting my samples on. And again, I've applied it to the foil sheet. Just makes it, you know, a little bit more interesting, makes it look very scientific, and again, very, very tactile, and it's manoeuvrable with view to, you know, generating new and future antibacterial materials. Again, to consider the context at a later date. With that batch of samples, I think that there are improvements, and they could, on their own, go into a refining process, which again, I really, really enjoyed about this with the new future materials, is that every sampling process that I did go through, there was always room to continue further with research and to really push the boundaries. But what I just wanted to do at this stage was to just really enjoy and get a feel for the new and future materials. As I'd started to process, I'd discovered expandable foam. Now, through the developments of research in my sketchbook, when you actually research deeper into bacteria or disease or COVID-19, there's some very, very interesting imagery of the cell structures and also colour palettes. Discovering the expandable foam was by accident, but it also entailed a little bit of a process by injecting the foam onto greaseproof paper, smoothing it out, and then that way you could actually draw into the material, allow it to dry. Then once that was achieved, you could then peel the expandable foam from the greaseproof paper, which allowed you to cut, to paint, and just have, you know, lots and lots of fun and experimentation with the product. What I've done with these particular samples is I have gone back to some of the original materials that I'd used. I'd used originally an iron, so that we generated melting, shrinking, and slight either decrease or expanding of the product. But again, it generated some interesting results. As we can see with these samples, there is a combination of new and future materials. And you will also see as well, there are now splashes of colour, which there was a photograph from a fashion show where they'd used fluorescent neon colour. It's a colour palette that I've not worked with before. I was a little bit apprehensive, but I just thought, you know, give it a go to push the boundaries and just to make the samples, you know, more exciting and to generate more ideas really, so that it became quite scientific. There are a lot of these colours naturally within molecule and cell structure, so that inspired me. A designer, Iris van Herpen, inspired me as well. Her clothing is very textural, very three-dimensional, very scientific and very futuristic, and it kind of, the samples that I produced kind of reflected that she just enables her outcomes of experiments, and then just encases the body within the garment or the fabric print, so that the object becomes the actual context for fashion. Now, considering the context for fashion for my final sampling, I didn't, I suppose I narrowed down really and just considered a few ideas, as I think that at some point there has to be a cut-off point. But again, I think any of my work, there would always be more refinement, more experimentation, and pick up from where you left off to continue any of these ideas. So still continuing with the idea of cell and molecule structure, I'd started to just work on its own, the expandable foam. And this is where I'd really pushed into the idea of drawing into it and experimenting, and it just naturally happened that the cell structure just developed, and it looks almost sort of sci-fi, the way that the foam formation, you can actually see through here, I've drawn into the foam and just allowed it to work its way as it's dried through the air. That as an idea then, I returned to my original idea, but using the refinement of the new expandable foam and a new colour palette of the antibacterial textiles. This has photographic evidence on my blog and in my sketchbook that this was actually used as a mask in a context and the connotation of new and future materials, the antiviral textile, which through research that they will for the future, so-called, we will be wearing t-shirts and jeans and trousers that will be antibacterial or self-cleaning for the future. Hence again reflective to the current situation of COVID-19. Again, there's just another sample that I think works really well, the face mask. Again, that was evidence in photographs in my sketchbook and blog. This then finalised just 2 samples. I'd started to look at either an antibacterial body decoration or a body tag or a piece of jewellery. Through here I'd actually discovered some neon bracelets that you actually join together and they become viewable when you switch the lights off, and they are very, very neon. I think you only get about 5 hours use out of them, but again, with the combination of the expandable foam, you can clearly see that there's some new and future materials there. And then the last of my samples, again just returning and using some of the earlier discovered materials from early on in the assignment. This actually was, I went back to very, very early on, back to the dyeing process where Indian ink does actually stain new and future materials, and that almost gives it a burnt, melted metal context, which I kind of maybe thought had I started to move away from, you know, what I was initially trying to achieve, but I still think it has cell-like structure. Quite again, sci-fi, scientific. This again is evident with photograph footage on my blog and in my sketchbook. And then I have this, which is a large scale piece of expandable foam. I didn't know what to do with this, and I've left this really as an open book for further development. I have another one that's here under process, and I really just like them as they are, so I didn't really want to touch them, but I think that will be something that I am going to consider. You can actually see that I've drawn into the structure. It's very flexible. As a product, it's accessible. Whether it's sustainable, I don't know, but it is just a fantastic product to work with. And I think the connotations and context of what this could be used, it could be used in clothing, jewellery, accessories, or it could even be used in interior design around the home, or I think it could also be used, you know, textiles in art if wanted. But I have to say that is my new future and found material. This is Neil Garrett Lee 5.15521 Contemporary Practice, Traditional Textiles and New and Future Textiles, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and I hope you enjoyed watching this video.